Thanks so much for joining me, everybody. Today, I'm going to be talking about improving the return on investment for technical content. My name is Carl Hughes. I'm the founder and CEO of Draft.dev. If you've got questions after, definitely feel free to reach out to myself or anybody on the Draft.dev team. We can go into more depth with you. So first, just a quick bit of background on Draft.dev in case you're not familiar. We are a technical content marketing agency focused exclusively on production of technical content aimed at software engineers. So we work with about 300 software engineers who are working day to day in engineering. So some form of software related fields like data engineering, data science, DevOps engineering. We've got some security engineers, software engineers, front-end engineers, probably one or two hardware engineers. I mean, really all over the place, but all really focused in on the discipline of creating software for companies in their day jobs. And then they write for us nights and weekends. And so the great thing is we're getting practitioners that are in the field every day that keep up with best practices and want to get the word out there to other engineers and help them learn as well. And that's who works with us on the writer side. We work with over 100 clients. Most of these companies are developer tools companies or API companies that are building something they're directly selling to software engineers or engineering managers. So we're very familiar with that whole field and the kind of marketing that they do. And we've been operating for about 2 years now. I've been writing independently before that for several years. And then I was a CTO as well before that. But Draft.dev as a company has only existed the last couple of years. We've grown really quickly because there's just so much demand in this space for developer marketing services and developer marketing companies like what we do. And very few have figured out how to do it at the scale that we're doing at Draft.dev. And so the exciting thing there is we get to see a ton of content come through our doors and a ton of different companies that are trying different things in content marketing. We typically produce one of three kinds of content, and there's sort of variations on each of these types, and there's a few other fringe types that also fit into this, but I'll put the three biggest buckets up here on the board. So typically we'll do a lot of tutorials. These are hands-on integration guides showing people how to actually build software with the client's tool or integrate the client's tool into their existing tools, things like that. Usually these kind of pieces of content are going to include code samples. They'll include a GitHub repo. They'll include any best practices, gotchas, screenshots. These are written by engineers again. So you've got really hands-on technical stuff. So typically this is the sort of content that companies will come to us to start on. We also do a lot of roundups, which are basically comparisons of groups of tools. So let's say something like best JavaScript frameworks in 2023. We do a lot of that kind of stuff because generally speaking, those kind of articles can be really fluffy and lightweight. A lot of times they're written for SEO and keyword purposes, but we bring in real software engineers who know these topics really well to talk about them and add some authority to the content. And so that really helps when it comes to ranking, but it also helps when it comes to actually making useful content, which is always our goal. And then finally, we do a lot of guides, which are sort of a higher level version of tutorials. This might be something like a deep dive that's just interesting to your general community. So for example, maybe it's something like how Kubernetes networking works. And it goes in a deep dive of the internals, the specifics, the things that you need to know as an end user. We're not necessarily building a demo app like we would in a tutorial, but we're definitely getting technical, probably have some code snippets and things like that. So that's the biggest buckets of content that we do. Now, what's interesting is compared to a lot of marketing firms and content marketing companies, we're not really a strategic company. We don't come in and offer content strategy as a service to our clients. All of our clients have some level of strategy already done in-house, and they come to us once they need help with execution. A little bit of a caveat there. We do offer keyword research and a little bit of community research, but companies have to come to us saying that's what they're going for. That's the strategy they're taking. And we're not going in and saying, this is what you should do to grow your content effectiveness. And so what's unique about that is we get to see a lot of strategies in practice, and almost like as a third party who's just helping produce content, we get to see what works and what doesn't. And we get to hear from clients how well the things that they're trying out with us are actually doing in the real world. So what's kind of cool here is that we're not coming to clients and saying, we know the best way, and this is the way you have to do content. We're sitting back as observers and saying, what are you doing for content? What's working and what's not? And we're taking that information in. And then that's kind of where this webinar came out, is we've seen this big difference between the clients who come to us, work with us consistently over a long period of time and get really good things done on their marketing side versus ones that struggle and maybe work with us for a quarter and then have a hard time figuring out what to write about next, or they get blocked because they haven't seen results from their content. And so what I wanted to put this webinar together for was to showcase some of the things, the observations that we've made working with over 100 clients in the last couple of years and seeing what works and what doesn't in developer marketing. And I think eventually this might be some kind of content asset we can give out to all new clients or something like that. But for now, I figured it would be a good test to just package up what we know and go forward from there. So the first big observation that I'll say about developer content, and this might be obvious, but I think it's really important to note, and it's important to note the caveats as to why they are and what works for them. So all the big companies in the space of developer marketing, especially if they have a product-led or bottoms-up strategy, are doing some level of content marketing. And most of the big ones are doing a lot of content marketing of some form or another. Now, content marketing in developer circles doesn't necessarily look like content marketing in a traditional B2B circle or a B2C context, because developer marketing is often very technical and gets kind of edges right up against the documentation world. So what we see a lot from big companies is there's content being produced by their developer relations teams, there's content produced by their marketing teams, there's content produced by external and community members, and they're kind of blending all this content together and figuring out a good mix for them. Now, the big difference between a lot of the bigger companies that I've got listed here and the smaller ones that come to us, they're just getting started with content. These bigger ones have a really great sense of what the return on the investment for their content is. So in other words, if I went to one of these larger companies and I asked, how many page views does a typical blog post bring in that you publish onto your engineering blog? And how much of those page views worth from a monetary standpoint, they could probably tell me this many signups happen, which leads to this many conversions, which leads to this much lifetime value of a customer. And I know that sounds simple in a way because you're just talking about connecting 4 or 5 steps together. But in reality, a lot of companies aren't doing this. And it's one of the big reasons that bigger companies can invest many thousands of dollars into a single piece of content, and a lot of smaller startups struggle to even justify spending $1,000 or $2,000 on a single piece of content. And so one big difference and one thing to think about is how you actually measure your ROI. And again, we'll go over this throughout this talk. I've also noticed that some of our smaller clients, even companies in the seed stage, have figured this out. And these 2 observations made me realize there is a way to find a good ROI for your content at any stage company, but you have to be intentional. You have to really work at it. We've seen some small clients that are creating really great long-term SEO value, generating hundreds of thousands of page views within a year or 2 of working with us or working with other content providers to really ramp up the number of customers they have, at least the awareness they have in the space. We've seen companies that we work with creating really short-term but highly effective and high ROI pieces of content around sales collateral that helps the sales team close deals. And so there are ways to do this. And that's what we'll focus on is, okay, if you're not the biggest player in your market, what do you do to make an impact in content? How can you get a positive ROI from content? And that's what we'll talk about a lot today. The other thing that I've noticed is that a lot of companies underestimate the amount that goes into producing content. And I highlighted a couple of these squares in green because these are the only parts that we're involved with on a firsthand basis, but we see the most successful companies looking at all of these things. They're setting goals for their content. They have a cohesive strategy aligned with pushing those goals forward, and then they put in the proper instrumentation so they can tell if their strategy and goals are actually being met. So then we come in usually when it comes to the content planning phase, like they know what strategy they're taking. They've got some ideas in their backlog and they're looking to us to just start execution. Let's create 12, 24, 48 articles this quarter and get things going. And we'll go through the content creation process, doing editing, tech reviews, finding the right writers for each piece, revisions with the client. So there's a lot involved in that little bit, but it's definitely not the whole cycle. The clients also have to, the ones who get the most success out of content, spend a fair bit of time and sometimes money even promoting each piece of content, which I'll talk about later on in this talk. We do help a bit with promotion. We'll help create social collateral, but it's pretty minimal in all honesty. There's a lot more you have to do beyond just what we'll send off with each piece. And then finally, not to be underestimated, is doing content refreshes every so often. Because we're in a technical field, almost always your content is going to get out of date within 2 or 3 years. And so you really need to think about, what do we do with that old content that's 3 or 4 years old and starting to dip in the rankings, or it's like not as useful anymore because the APIs are all out of date. The way we talked about it isn't the best way to do things. Do we completely scrap and rewrite that piece? Can we update that piece? Can we find the original author to update that piece? It's a lot of work. But again, the top tier companies that get the most ROI out of their content extend the life of each piece of content as much as possible. And that's something I've really noticed the companies that figure this out doing. And then the other thing, the sad truth is, because so many companies underestimate how much time it takes and how much is involved in creating a really successful content lifecycle, they fall into what I call the content failure cycle. Often this happens like this. A new marketing lead comes in or a content lead comes in. They get really excited about content. They hear the case studies from the big companies doing content, and they sort of boil it down into, we need to produce technical content. So they come to us, they start working with us on some random ideas that they came up with. And it's often one of the big things that we push clients to is like, why did you come up with those ideas? Why are those the most important things to write about? What is your strategy behind those? What are the goals you have behind those? Because often if you don't know that, you're not going to get the best results. So what we see is companies start publishing random ideas. They see very little or no real positive ROI, return on investment for their content. And that marketing lead eventually moves on, whether it's their choice or not, and the cycle continues. And this really sucks for everybody involved. I mean, from us as an outside provider, it sucks because we look bad, like we didn't do the greatest job because the content didn't lead to the ROI people thought it would. But often the company as well is just really struggling to find traction when they're entered into this cycle. So my encouragement to companies sort of facing that is stop and sit back and get strategic for a bit. The last thing I'll notice are just some high-level observations about the companies that get the most success out of content. The first is the ones who I see doing the best have accepted the fact that marketing is more science and data driven than it is art and creativity. There is certainly some creativity in marketing, just like there's creativity in software engineering. I spent 10 years as a software engineer before this. And often I thought to myself that marketers were just kind of creatives who did things on their own, the beat of their own drum, and they didn't really have a plan for things. They just did whatever they felt like. And I think I maybe was working with inexperienced marketers, but at the same time, what I've realized working with clients who do have really strong marketing teams now is that the best ones are very scientific in their approach and very technical in their approach and very data-driven in their approach. The other thing I notice is that companies that have too many goals do just as bad a job hitting those goals as marketing teams that have no goals at all. I remember a conversation very early on where I was talking to a client and they wanted to work with us. And I asked them, what are their goals for the content? Are you looking at building out your top of funnel? Do you want to convert people? Do you want to kind of get people in the consideration phase? Where are you trying to aim? What are some of the big KPIs you're going to measure? And they said, basically, we need to not only raise awareness, but also make more money and drive more email subscribers and get more contributors to our open source. And I only have 3 months to do it and $10,000. Like, let's do it. And I was like, that's just not possible in reality. I mean, you can maybe get lucky and do that 1 in 100 times, but it's certainly not a repeatable sort of data-driven strategy for marketing. And so having all your goals be the number one goal will almost certainly, like anything, lead you into that bad cycle for marketing. Creating content and then not having a plan to promote it is also a big waste of time. And we're going to talk a lot about promotion in this because I think it's really important. And then finally, having ways to measure and instrumentation that allows you to measure the results of your content is often overlooked. I actually remember several renewal calls I did early on with clients. And I asked them, you know, your goals for content were things like increasing number of page views and email signups. So how did you do? And often they'd say, well, we got page views. That's Google Analytics. That's easy. But we didn't have a good way to track the number of email signups that came in from each piece of content. So we actually don't know how many subscribers we got through content. And so they spent a large amount of money with us and then didn't even know if what we had done produced the results they expected. And it's really a shame because, again, you're not operating in a data-driven way. You're operating in this just guess and feel sort of way. And it's nice when it works, but it also is really hard to adjust and tweak what you're doing and improve over time. So today I want to talk about a couple more things. I started with observations, and I think that's a somewhat interesting place to start. But let's get into some real tactical advice. So the bulk of this talk is going to be about specific ways you can improve the ROI of your technical content. And I'm going to focus on the 4 parts of doing that. The next section will be some real world examples. So I've pulled out and anonymized a few clients we've worked with that have gotten really good results using different strategies. And I'll talk about what they do and how it's worked for them. And then finally, I'll end off with a few additional resources and links you can get to. Okay, so let's go through a quick framework, and then we're going to talk about each of these pieces in detail. So the first big key to any content framework, whether it's technical or non-technical, is defining success. And that's deciding on the metrics that you want to chase. We'll talk about some of those possible metrics you could use and why they might make sense for different companies at different stages. Next, you have to design a content plan that actually sort of points back at the metrics that you're trying to improve. So again, everything kind of drives off of what are our goals for our content. And so you set those goals and then you say, let's build a plan for what kind of content we're going to write based on those goals. Let's then publish and promote each piece of content that points back to those goals. And promotion is also really tied into the kind of goals you want too. So in other words, if your goals are increased page views, you might promote a piece of content much differently than if your goal is just purely drive conversions of people who already know about your application. And then we'll talk about how to track a bit and some of the tools you can use, as well as some of the best practices for that, and how to iterate on each piece of content or the plan you've got, the strategy you have for content going forward. So we're going to cover a fair bit of stuff, but I'm going to stay really tactical and give really specific examples along the way. First things first is defining success. So again, one of the questions we always ask our new clients is, what are some of your goals for content? And some of the things we hear most are something like, we want to get 10,000 page views a month in 3 months, or we want to rank in the top 3 for 5 of our top 100 keywords or top 50 keywords or something like that. We want to generate 500 marketing qualified leads a month, or we want to answer 20 support tickets per month with written content, or we want to create collateral that the sales team can use to close 20 deals. All these are really good goals. These are very specific. They would very much tell me the kind of content you need to produce, with maybe just asking a few more kinds of questions to get an idea of where your funnel's strength is. But they're also very different goals. And it's almost impossible to chase all of these kind of goals at once without a huge content budget and a huge team to help promote each piece and work through each. Now, again, the bigger companies can do this because they may have 20 or 30 marketers or content people who are in charge of building out this content and publishing and promoting it and strategizing how to use it. But if you're kind of starting out, or you're in the middle of your journey as a company, you're Series A, Series B, Series C, somewhere in there, you probably don't have the resources that the biggest companies in your space do. And so the key is to hone in on the goals that matter most to you at this point in your company's history. One way I like to help define that and drive this lever is by judging the payback period of each of these goals. So in other words, and when I say payback, I mean actual dollars in the door, the payback period. Things at the top of this list, like generating lots of page views, is great for awareness. But generally speaking, those page views don't necessarily translate into sales immediately. One of the downsides to content is that it is a long-term operation. You can write 100 pieces of content and start getting lots of page views, but you may not get sales immediately from that content unless you've, again, aimed at that level of the funnel and you've got the rest of the things in place you need. Kind of down towards the bottom, as far as like faster payback period, are things like sales collateral. We'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, because we've seen a lot of clients who are trying to get a quicker return on investment for content, aim towards those sort of sales and support driven pieces and get really good results. The key is knowing that those are probably not the same pieces of content that bring in tens of thousands of visitors a month. They're more directed, they're focused further down the funnel, so the numbers are just not going to be as high. So again, as a marketer, deciding what your goal is and defining that success is one of the most important things. And it's really how you define, I mean, this is basically the definition of ROI, is having a goal that you can measure, you can decide X number of dollars towards pieces of content led to Y number of dollars back into the company, or led to this goal that we needed to hit. Some other things that I will point out, again, is the fewer the goals, the easier it's going to be to actually track and hit and know that you're doing this, and then iterate through those goals. I'll also say that the goals you set will depend a lot on what stage your company is at. So again, we've worked with companies from seed stage all the way up to publicly traded, and we've got people at all levels in between at this point. What's interesting is a lot of really early stage startups can set goals that are not revenue driven, and that makes sense for them. If you work in an early stage startup, you know this, but I'll just throw this out here in case it's helpful. If you're in seed or Series A, your investors might be looking at page views or GitHub stars or some other kind of metric, even email subscribers, as your key metric, and not just end revenue. And so if those are your key metric drivers that you're really trying to push to get your next round of investment, it's important that you understand that, and that you set content goals and you create the kind of content that would attract those things, rather than aiming for revenue driving content, which again, may not be the thing your investors care about at the early stage of the company. Now, again, this is very, like, I worked in venture funded startups for 10 years, and everyone is different, and every VC is different, every angel investor is different. So I can't tell you what they want to look for in your company, but I can absolutely tell you the results that they're looking for vary wildly depending on what their goals are and your goals are, and how you're selling the company to them. The other thing that I've noticed, again, working with 100+ clients in the last couple of years, has been that developer relations and developer marketing may often be working closely together and may be friends, or they may be really far apart as far as what their goals are for content. And I think this can be a challenge for anybody in DevRel or developer marketing. But in another way, you have to realize where you sit in the org chart and what matters most to you. So often what I see, again, this is broadly speaking, and there's lots of variation, especially because DevRel is such a new field where everybody's figuring it out. But often I see developer relations people focusing more on documentation, support, use cases, integration guides, things that ride the line with documentation. And their goals are often a little murkier than marketing teams. On the other hand, marketing teams often have a little bit of a stronger sense of what their goals are and a little bit better of a sense of, we're driving page views or email signups. They also tend to be more focused on things like the sales collateral, which is often something that marketing people think about. And so knowing where you sit in the organization is going to help you define the kinds of content you need to write, especially if you're trying to report up to a C-level or a marketing lead or a DevRel lead, and you're trying to pitch them on the best kind of content to produce. And then this should be obvious because I've talked so much about goals, but creating content just for the sake of creating content is a really bad reason to do it. And so definitely think about that and set really good goals. I was on a call a month ago with a potential client, and they kind of said, like, I don't really even care what the content does, just I need content. And I mean, I guess that's fine, but it's also it's going to be tough to sell that to your boss. Even if you sell it the first time and your boss buys in, you get some content, like, are you going to be able to sell that again when renewal time comes around, like when they're asking about the return on investment for this piece of content they're creating? Probably not. And so just creating content is fine if you are really, really sure that that's all your boss's boss and the founders of the company need. But in most cases, people want to see an actual ROI and it driving toward a metric. Okay, so we've talked about defining the success, setting some goals for content. That's just a first prerequisite step to even defining what ROI is. I'll talk about how you can use those goals to measure the ROI later. But the next step is to take those goals and from those goals, design a plan for the pieces of content that you write. So content ideation is another one that clients often come to us and they're like, well, we kind of know that we want our content to drive page views, but we have no idea how to do that. And so what I'll often give them is a question around, like, where in the funnel are you trying to drive results? The idea of a marketing funnel is at the top of the funnel, you have your broadest reach and you are trying to just build awareness that your company exists. When you say I'm building top of funnel, it means I'm building awareness that we are a thing and an option for people. It may even be, if you're in a new space, like an emergent piece of tech, it may just be awareness that the problem exists, which can be really hard and that cycle is really long, but awareness is the top of the funnel. A little down further, you get into the consideration phase, which means they know you exist, but they also know 2 or 3 of your competitors exist, or they know the DIY option exists. And how do you compare? How are you better? Why are you going to save them time? Content that drives the consideration phase can be things like integration guides that show how your tool solves a certain problem with another tool set, or things like buy versus build guides, which are really popular as well. Like, here's the step-by-step how you'd build your own SMS texting platform. And then here's how easy it is to use with our tool, things like that. And then the purchase decision is like, okay, they've kind of decided you're the right one. They think you might be. They maybe get on a call with sales if it's a more enterprisey company, or if it's a developer-related one, maybe they've signed up for a free trial and now you're trying to push them into paid. There's also content that can do this. And that content is generally going to be the kind of thing that shows the advantages of moving to a paid version, or is kind of a deeper, like towards the documentation type content. We'll go into that more in a bit. And then finally, retention is all about keeping or upselling existing customers to your platform. So again, there's different kinds of content strategies that map what different areas in the funnel or different stages in the marketing funnel. And knowing where you want to aim is really important because it's going to help you define the strategy you can take. And again, knowing your goals helps you define where in the funnel you need to go. So content ideation strategies that sort of match places in the funnel. At the top of the funnel, the most top of funnel types of content ideation strategies are generally going to be thought leadership, which we'll go into in a bit as what that means, and keyword research. I say they're most top of funnel because generally speaking, the most successful companies that are focused on keyword-driven articles, SEO-driven articles, or like this high-level thought leadership, where's our industry going type pieces, are generally aiming at just increasing top of funnel traffic from either Google or places like Hacker News and Reddit, sort of those clickbaity type places that get lots and lots of traffic, but it's hard to know if any of that traffic is really qualified or interested in buying your product. But you might be able to drop some awareness on them. So it's still important to have this kind of content, but the payback period is longer on this. Down further into the funnel, you get stuff like community research. We'll go into that in a second, but basically it's going out into the community, seeing what people are talking about, whether they're talking about your tool and competitors and things like that, and how you can kind of slot yourself into those conversations. And then further down, there's sales collateral and augmenting your documentation. These are actually pretty closely related, and it sort of depends. I would use these almost interchangeably depending on the organization and the way you do sales. So we'll talk about the differentiation in just a bit. But basically, these are kinds of content that help when an engineer is actually likely to use your tool, and they're just checking all the boxes to make sure you've got the documentation they need, make sure you do all the integrations they need, make sure you work in their framework and language the best that they need, and things like that. So again, we'll go into each of these in specifics here as we go, but that's kind of a high level of how to think about those different ones. And I'll just caveat all this with, of course, there are thought leadership pieces you could do that are more aimed down in the consideration and purchase phase. And there's probably keyword research you could do more towards the consideration phase, especially if you're in an established market where you're not just trying to build awareness that your solution exists. Again, this is generalizations. Okay, so thought leadership, I kind of define this as like sharing your worldview. This is one kind of content that we've tried to steer clear of at Draft.dev because we work with third-party writers, and sure, they're great software engineers. They may have some opinions on the industry, but it's likely they don't match up 100% with the founder of your company and where you think the industry is going. There's cases where that's, obviously maybe they do, but in rare cases. And honestly, after talking to dozens of our clients about this, I found the most successful thought leadership content strategies, they have to be written by people at the company or people very close to the company, because it's very hard to share your worldview with a third-party writer and then get them to actually push that out in the same way that you would. But typically, thought leadership content is really powerful pieces of content. You don't have to do a lot of it, a high volume of it, to get good results, but you do have to just try it and be consistent. And a lot of companies really struggle with this because getting a CEO or a CTO or a head of DevRel even to write a thought leadership piece can be really tough, wherever you sit in the marketing stack. So a couple things they're good for. Shareability. These are the kind of pieces that go blow up on Reddit and Hacker News. Maybe they get shared widely in your niche community and your newsletters. They're good at attracting new readers and backlinks. We actually have an example of this as a client that is doing primarily keyword-driven content. So most of their content is SEO focused, bottom or top and middle of funnel, but they do one or two thought leadership kind of clickbait type pieces a month. And I say clickbait, I don't mean that disparagingly. Like, it's actually really interesting, good content, but it's not based on a keyword. It's not based on any sort of prior research of the space. They just kind of know their community and they know what might resonate. They'll write a couple of those a month. And what happens is those pieces attract a lot of attention and a lot of backlinks that then raise the domain authority they have and raise the ability for them to rank for other keywords in the future. So this works really nicely in tandem with SEO driven content. And a lot of people sort of think it's either or. I think in reality, most content strategy should be a mix of different things. And you just have to define that mix based, again, on your goals and where in the funnel you want to hit people. These are also good for filling your retargeting audience. Paid ads towards developers is kind of a controversial strategy because some people point out, and rightly so, that a lot of developers use ad blockers. Therefore, putting ad dollars into dev audiences can be kind of wasteful, and it's probably true. But retargeting or remarketing, whichever you call it, is really unique in that you're targeting people who've already been to your site once. And so you're not going to spend nearly as many wasted ad dollars on the lower quality clicks that you might if you're just doing broad keyword ads. So retargeting can be really nice if you get a really interesting thought leadership piece that kind of targets your target audience, but it's pretty top of funnel. You can then retarget to kind of push them further down the funnel. The downside to this is that, again, with this thought leadership content, it's generally low purchase intent. Rarely does a thought leadership piece have broad appeal and like a high chance that people are ready to buy your product, but it does build awareness. Also, it's really unpredictable. A client that I mentioned who's doing a mix of thought leadership and SEO driven content, probably 1 in every 3 or 4 of their pieces like really goes kind of semi-viral, and then a lot of them just kind of fall flat. Now, there's some people who are better than that. Some people are way worse at that. So just put the asterisk of not every piece is going to be a winner, no matter how experienced you are in writing them or promoting them. The next content ideation strategy that's worth talking about is keyword research. So if you come from a traditional content marketing background, you're probably very familiar with SEO and keyword research. But if you're more from the DevRel background, what I find is people are more skeptical or don't know anything about keyword research. So I think it's important to point out. And we have a guide that I'll share in the additional resources about how we do the keyword research for clients and topic clusters, which is a really effective way of interlinking and building up a keyword research strategy. So if you ever have questions about that and you want to do it on your own, definitely let me know. I'm happy to share. Keyword research is good for people in the awareness and consideration phase. So top of funnel again. Generally speaking, what you do with keyword research is you aim to get traffic based on targeting a specific keyword in your article or a set of keywords even. And you want it to rank in the top, say 5 of Google so that you get a number of clicks from that. And then ideally the piece of content in order to rank well has to both get backlinks and be a really high quality, good piece of content. When you're doing keyword research, you look for high traffic volume, high intent to purchase ideally, and a low competition score. So basically it's like not many other people ranking for that keyword in your space. It's really hard to find all 3 of those. And so you kind of have to decide how to move the levers to get a blend of content. Again, this is a whole talk on its own, but it's really good for building domain authority, which allows you to rank for things later on. It's really good for showcasing the general industry knowledge you have, for getting your solution to rank. A really common strategy in developer keyword research that I'll share that I've seen tons of clients use, and I highly encourage, if you are a tool that is kind of like a new paradigm shifting tool, you're kind of trying to build your own space around you, what you want to do is target the thing you replaced. So for example, if you built a tool that was like a better version of SQLite databases, instead of targeting your cool tools name everywhere, which has no search traffic, nobody knows it exists, what you would do is you'd write really good content around how to use SQLite, how to improve the performance of SQLite. And then in every one of those pieces, you would mention, oh, and also we exist and we're a better version of SQLite or whatever. This is a really effective way to do this because often you're targeting technologies that are a little more out of date and not as competitive. And so you can target these old tech and kind of push your new tech in at the end as a good like call to action or sort of next step for people. Really great for building awareness. The downside again to keyword research, it's hard to tell the purchase intent. And a lot of times you have to sacrifice purchase intent if you want high volume of traffic. The other thing that's unfortunate in keyword research, especially in a highly technical field like ours, is there's always going to be more traffic on the entry level and kind of like general terms. So what I mean by that is often clients will come to us and say like, look, we want to be #1 in Google for terms like, I don't know, deep learning, AI strategies, or security in deep learning or something like that. That's like just super niche. And they also will say, okay, we want to be #1 for that, which, okay, great, we could do that. But we also want to get 100,000 page views a month in the next 6 months. Okay, those two things are mutually exclusive. There just aren't 100,000 people a month looking for those terms. And so we either need to broaden out the funnel to meet that number of page views goal, or we tighten up and we focus in and don't worry about how little traffic we're getting, but just worried about how directed it is. So it's up to you to decide where you want to fall in that, but you almost can never do both perfectly. Community research is similar to keyword research, but a little less predictable. What I mean by that is with community research, what we'll typically do is go out to places like Stack Overflow, Reddit, different Slack groups, different niche blogs and communities, Medium posts, and things like that, and kind of see what people in the space are talking about. So again, we'll go back to that SQLite sort of example. If there's a lot of people out there talking about using SQLite on the edge, which is, I know that I've seen that a lot pop up on Hacker News and things, we might target content around SQLite in the edge or alternatives to SQLite for the edge, et cetera. This is really a good way to find hidden gems and spot real world trends. It's also, as a marketer, a good way to get in touch with your community in general, whether you use this as a way to come up with content ideas or not. I think it's just generally good practice to know what your communities are talking about. The downside is it can be medium to low purchase intent. Sometimes it's a little higher, but often you're not exactly sure these people are ready to buy. You're just trying to target the right communities. And then it can be really hard to determine how much volume of traffic you could actually get from a piece about, say, like alternatives to SQLite for the edge, because there may not be keyword volume from any of the big tools around that term, but it might be getting talked about a lot. So it's less predictable than keyword research. Sales collateral is another great use case for content. And again, this kind of, when you think about ROI from a standpoint of just generating revenue, sales collateral is one of the best ways to push content that actually generates revenue on a short period of time. So what I mean by that is sales collateral can be any kind of content that helps your sales or marketing teams close deals. So take people from either in the sales funnel and in the consideration phase into actually bought your product, or going from free trial into actually paid for the first team usage of it. So there's some ways you can do this. For example, if you're making an enterprise sale, often your primary buyer might be like an IT head or more of a business leader, but they might have to get buy-in from the DevOps engineers who are going to go implement your tool, or the software engineers that are going to go integrate it in with their existing software. And when that's the case, those people can become blockers just as easily as your business leader that's sitting up there that you're talking to primarily on the phone. So for sales teams, what they'll often ask us to do is create the collateral that would help engineers go from this tool seems kind of cool to, oh, this will actually work in our use case. And there's a great integration guide on how to use it for our use case. So again, with this, you can set goals like, I want 10 pieces of content. They're going to help us close 50 deals we wouldn't have closed without those pieces of content. And you go to your sales team and you ask them what piece of content would help you close these deals or overcome these objections from engineers. They've probably got a lot of ideas there. So this is really high ROI, good content to do if you're a sales driven org. If you're more of a product marketing driven organization or product-led growth org, then what this looks like is more the sorts of content that show people the advantages of your paid features. So for example, if engineers can use your tool for free on an individual, a solo basis, but in order to get a team version, they need to pay, you would show in your tutorials and in different use cases, here's how you can solve X big problem with your team on our paid plan, and then send that over in emails or in other collateral, maybe in your Slack groups that you have, whatever community-based content places you have. It's a pretty soft sell because you're basically just sharing helpful content. But if people see that and they know, oh, there is a team plan, oh, this could be useful at my work, it's not just a hobby thing, it could be really great to drive some conversions as well. The last one I'll talk about is augmenting your documentation. And again, this kind of rides the line between sales collateral and augmenting your docs are very, very similar. And I hope it's not too confusing. But the idea here is, how can we show engineers, not just tell them that our tool works with these other integrations in theory, or maybe give them the very high level API calls to make, but actually show them a step-by-step tutorial that goes into the depth of it. A good example of this that we've had a lot of clients come to us with is, if you are a tool like a code coverage testing tool, let's say, and your tool integrates with CI/CD platforms and programming languages and frameworks and GitHub, and you need to show the integrations between all 3 or 4 of those things, then building out tutorials that show engineers, here's how to do it with GitHub Actions and Python. Here's how to use our tool with Jenkins and Java, or Jenkins and Scala. And you can kind of go through the list, you iterate like this with this. Those kind of tutorials are really helpful for pushing engineers to use your product, but also it helps them understand that you were there and you're there to support their use case. So it can help also in the consideration phase. Typically, though, when you come up with these kind of ideas, don't expect them to drive tens of thousands of new page views from people who are not familiar with your product. It wouldn't make sense that they would. So you have to know your users and know the limitations of this kind of content. I don't want you to think this is going to drive tons and tons of traffic. And often this is, again, one of those things I hear from clients is they'll come to us, they'll say, we want a bunch of integration guides. We think that'd be really cool, but we also want those guides to drive tens of thousands of page views. And it's just not likely that that's going to happen unless you're a very established tool that already has lots of interest in the different things you're building. Some other things to think about. Budget, obviously. If you want to generate tens of thousands of page views, you can probably do that on a pretty lean budget. If you want to generate hundreds of thousands of page views a month, you are going to need to ramp up your content budget. I can give you ideas about what to spend, but it really depends a lot on your industry. It depends a lot on the competitiveness of the terms you're trying to target and the kinds of developers you want to reach. As you might imagine, reaching more senior developers at a high volume is extremely hard and pretty expensive. Whereas reaching a high volume of junior level engineers with content can be relatively cheap because you have to write junior level content, and that's cheaper to produce in general. The team that you have available kind of line in line with the budget. Do you actually have the budget to hire writers, editors, tech reviewers? Do you have those people available? Are engineers actually committed to reviewing content or writing content for you, or do you need to outsource that? And again, that's where we come in with clients. Typically, we're the outsourced partner for that. But if you do it in-house, and a lot of our clients, they work with us for a while and then they move it in-house later, totally fair, but just be ready to budget the whole team and the operational expense that you need to run that. Do you actually have buy-in from leadership that content is a good idea and that your goals you're setting for that content are good? Do you know your customer profile really well? Because that's going to help you tailor the content that you write for that customer profile. And what is your required payback period? And we talked about that earlier with the goal setting, but basically things at the top of the funnel have the longest payback period. Things at the bottom of the funnel are the quickest payback period, but the volume is lower. So there's this constant trade-off you have to make in content. Okay, I'm gonna take a quick pause and I will be happy to answer any questions if we've got any. Otherwise, I'll keep moving. And this includes the Draft.dev team. If you guys have any questions that came up through this, please feel free to shout them out.
I've got a question I can drop in just because I talk to a lot of people on the sales calls. And one of the questions I get a lot, particularly from early stage companies, their engineering team is able to create a few posts a month. Maybe they have leadership who likes to write, but they just don't have the bandwidth to do it all the time. So it's like, if our engineering team is able to write a few pieces a month, but our content goals are 4 to 6 pieces a month, what's the best way to kind of mentally think about it? Like divide up which pieces should we have our team focus on versus which could realistically be outsourced at like 80 to 90%, efficiency? Like, how do we kind of evaluate that trade-off?
That's a great question, because that kind of like can influence your cost structure, and it can influence how much engineering time you need to take from those people. And this is one of the biggest, like one of the first reasons I started like coming up with the idea of Draft.dev was that so many people came to me and said, we would love it if our engineers would write a piece of content every week, but the reality is they don't have time to commit to that, for a small to mid-sized company, even big companies. And then when you get into big companies, the challenge is the engineers are siloed off in a completely different organization, and they can't just go ask for engineering time to go write marketing content. So yeah, the answer here is the things that are closer to your internals or your product are going to be best written in-house. So things like how we built this or why we built this, those are almost always going to be way better in-house. I see a lot of really good engineering content come from companies that have kind of a semi-open or semi-transparent policy with their engineering teams, where the engineers can write about things they built, like maybe it's little open source tools that they built for the company, things like that. And so that kind of content is really great when it comes in-house. The things that are most obviously easy to outsource are the higher level pieces, like keyword-based pieces, community-based pieces that are more just about general knowledge of your space and not so much the inner workings of your product. And then there's kind of the spectrum. And honestly, like a lot of clients will kind of come to us and give us ideas that probably should be done in-house, and we'll just tell them now. I mean, we've gotten pretty good at kind of saying, nah, this isn't a good fit for us. We think this should be done in-house, and we're very transparent about that. And it's because we don't want to create content that's subpar. We don't want to disappoint. We don't want to set the expectation that we can do just anything you can kind of come up with. And I think that's just the honest and fair approach. I hope that answers your question a bit, Matt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And then this was a really good question from one of the attendees as well. How do we create the kind of content that augments documentation for clients? How do we get the engineers to create that? Do we make them use the client's product? So the short answer is yes, absolutely. We have our engineers as writers for us. They are often, when they're writing a tutorial, asked to actually use the client's product. Typically, we'll ask the client for a free trial or whatever, depending on the product itself. The other thing that we ask clients to always provide is documentation. So we don't do the first level of documentation. What I mean by that is we don't actually write API docs for clients. You have to have that level, and then we'll write the stuff on top of it. There's been a couple cases where clients had pretty loose documentation. They sent us videos and kind of back and forth feedback on it, and it takes a lot longer to produce. And honestly, it's difficult. We're willing to work through it, but we just always kind of caveat to clients that, look, it's going to take us longer than the typical piece of content would. I hope that answers that question, but feel free to drop more in the chat if I can clarify further. Awesome. I'll keep moving, and we'll have more time for questions at the end. So keep saving them up and or dropping them in the chat anytime, and I will open that back up in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about publishing and promoting content. And this is, again, one of these things that clients underestimate the amount of time that it's going to take to do, and also the amount of resources and who should be doing it, which is a really interesting and kind of difficult to nail down question. The first thing I'll say about it is that you need to match the promotion that you're doing with the phase in the funnel, or the stage in the funnel that you're aiming for. So what I mean by that are, there's certain channels that are just generally more top of funnel in public than others. Just in broad strokes, if you were promoting your content on Twitter, Reddit, LinkedIn, a Hacker News, anywhere that's like a more public forum, it's obviously going to aim at a less targeted group of users. Then on the other hand, if you're sending out content as DMs or support request answers or as Slack messages to people in your community, it's usually aiming towards the bottom of that funnel. So again, thinking about each piece you produce, where it's going to be published, and then how best to promote it is a critical like sort of path for the whole thing. So to kind of take a couple examples, like let's say that you're producing a piece that is more of a consideration phase, like you're targeting users who have already seen your site at some point in there, but they bounced off of it. They're coming back later, or maybe it's people who are on your email list, but they haven't actually committed to buying. So people in the consideration phase can be really tricky to reach, but you can do that through a few things like paid ads, like retargeting ads is a really good way, especially if you've, again, and I know this ads is tough because of cookie changes lately and developers using ad blockers, but it can work. I've had plenty of clients tell us it does work for them. You can also do things like if they're on your newsletter, promoting that piece about the consideration phase, like us versus them, or this versus that versus this, can be really good. Or if you've got closed communities or smaller communities, Slack communities in your niche, you can kind of target people directly. That's really good as well. As far as like top of funnel content, if you're doing keyword research, you almost certainly need to build backlinks to your pieces to get them to rank, especially in a competitive area. Again, if you're new to keyword research, the whole idea is that Google basically looks at each piece of content that's published on the internet. It sees, does it kind of fit for certain keywords, or it's like kind of trying to suss out the keywords from the piece of content. It's looking at the content's technical depth and thousands of other factors, and most of those are secret. But it's basically looking at the piece of content and seeing, is this authoritative? Is it helpful? Is it useful? And then it also takes in the number of backlinks, reputable backlinks that piece of content has. So how many other good sources on the internet are linking to it? Now, I personally don't love the whole cold outreach backlink method. I think it's way overdone. And I get at least 50 emails a day asking for people to add backlinks to our content on Draft.dev. So I ignore every one of them. So I don't think it's really effective anymore, but there's certainly some good ways to do it that are more legitimate and interesting at this point. And I don't want to, this is a whole nother topic, so I'm not going to get off on a tangent, but definitely DM me if you want to talk about that. I've got a couple things that people are trying. I've used services like Help a Reporter Out as a good way to pitch different ideas and get backlinks. Works really well. And there's other things like that for writing on other guest places and things. So anyway, there are lots of different ways to promote. And one of the links I'll include in the additional resources is a big checklist of ways you can promote your technical content and what you can get out of that. A couple of things that I'll say about this. The first is like one way to help yourself save a lot of time on promoting content is to outsource the promotion of it to a more junior team member or a freelancer or somebody who's like a little less directly connected with your core organization. Because if you create a great piece of content and you build a checklist, like as the marketing strategist, you kind of build out the checklist of where this needs to be promoted, how this needs to be promoted, which newsletters to pitch this to. You do all that hard thinking work. The actual rote work of actually just scheduling it onto your Twitter account or reaching out to each of these newsletters and pitching the idea, a lot of times that can be done by a more junior DevRel or dev marketing person. So often we see clients kind of doing that split there. There's no right and wrong way there to do that. I mean, obviously, if you've got time and you can spend it, go for it. Or if you have budget, you can pay for promotion to pieces. You can run ads to individual pieces of content. We have had lots of clients do that sort of thing, or partially. I'm hesitant to recommend gating content for developers because it totally just depends on your market. It depends on what kind of content it is, who it's aimed at. So that's a nuanced thing too, but there are people who do that and see it work. So it can work. Another thing that I see is really underutilized for promoting content is syndication. So there's tons of publications on Medium, Dev.to, Hashnode, other places that actually look for and take content from other original sources and republish it there with a canonical link back to your original piece. And I actually have a whole article, again, it's in the resources slide at the end of this, that is all the places that we've seen syndicating developer content. This is great for just getting like more exposure to bigger existing audiences. There are also like niche places you can go. So like a place like and I don't know if Towards Data Science allows syndication, but they at least take guest posts and things like that. So there's other publications for different niches within developers, the developer subset. So make sure you know those publications. And then you can both use personal and company accounts. And depending on the sort of willingness of your engineering team. You may want to share with them to share with their networks if they're the kind of people who are on social media. Again, this kind of varies person to person and company to company, but the last thing is like you can repeat it. So what's great about most developer focused content is that it is evergreen, at least within the first year or two before it gets out of date and you have to go refresh it. And so if you can do, like we often see clients who have content on a cycle where they are promoting it initially big push right after it's published. And then every month they have a few small ways to kind of put it back out into the world. And then every quarter they do a big push again. And again, this is, I mean, you can spend a ton of time re-pushing your content out there to all these channels and get a lot of results on a very small base of content if you're willing to invest in that. Okay, the last section here in this core part of the presentation is the tracking and iterating. And the first thing I'm going to kind of point out is just what do I mean when I say return on investment? I probably should have, I think about this now, maybe I should have led with this, but let's just take a really simple formula for return on investment for a piece of content. So we've talked with clients where they've done these numbers and they have them. They're estimates. They're never perfect, but like this is what it can look like in some cases. They might take a single piece of content and realize that it gets them a lifetime value of about $3,000. Now I'll go over how they come to that. It costs them $2,000 to produce. Therefore, the return on investment for a piece of content is $1,000. Now, again, there's lots of caveats here because the shelf life of a piece of content can be longer. Maybe the cost to refresh is relatively low compared to the cost to initially publish. Maybe they actually put paid ad spend to try to get even more out of it. There's lots of things you can do to kind of tweak these numbers, but it's important to start to get an idea of this. And so the way it can look in practice is, let's say that a single piece of content, when you publish it, generally speaking, the average is it brings in 100 email subscribers over the course of 2 years. So once you've built content for a while, you'll start to get these numbers, especially if you've directly focused on building email newsletter subscribers or gathering subscribers. And let's say from your email list, the conversion rate is 3% actually go buy your product. And for that, we know that our lifetime value on our SaaS tool is $1,000 per customer. So it's a pretty straightforward calculation to your lifetime value of a piece of content and effective lifetime value, again, with the asterisks of maybe refreshing it, you get a couple more years out of it, but maybe that costs more. So if these are your numbers, you can do content all day long. The challenge is often that it takes a while to build up enough data to get these numbers. And this is where there's a bit of like, marketers often really struggle with, what do I do to prove to my boss who's skeptical about content that it's worth doing when it's going to take 2 years to determine what the lifetime value of a piece of content is. So this is where I often push clients to think maybe there's a way to get a shorter return on investment for it. So if instead you focus on writing content that is aimed at closing sales, and we talked about the sales collateral driven content, let's say you come in with the sales team says they've gotten 10 leads in the last year for this particular technical question that they don't know how to answer, and they would love a piece of content around it. And let's say that it answers the objections for 30% of those people. Then the lifetime value of $1,000, we get a $3,000, total lifetime value on a piece of content. Again, these are rough numbers, but it's a lot faster to prove this out than the other one. And I'm not saying one is right or wrong by any means. I mean, generally speaking, we focus on more long-term value of content because that's one of the things I really like about content is it's got a long shelf life and a high ROI over time, and it compounds as you do more of it. But if you have a skeptical boss and you want to get into content, then maybe focus towards the bottom of the funnel so you can show them results more quickly and make sure that you've got something to show for the dollars you're putting in on a pretty quick basis. But in any case, you're almost never going to get an appreciable ROI on content in less than 3 to 6 months. And even 3 to 6 months is extremely short. A lot of companies put in 6 to 12 months or 24 months before they really start to see enough of a critical mass of content, even with sales-driven content. So I just always caveat this whenever clients ask about content marketing as a channel. If you're a venture-funded company and you have a 6-month cycle to sort of prove out your numbers to hit the next stage of funding, content is not going to be the fastest way to generate ROI. But that said, if you do invest in content and you see some results and you can pitch that to investors, like we'll see in some of these examples, it can absolutely drive results fast enough from a matter of page views or just getting awareness of your product out there. So we'll talk about specific examples in a minute. And then along with this, just some kind of ideas and tools to keep in mind for iterating on what works in content, you need some basic tools in place. Google Analytics and Search Console are probably the two just most basic core ones that everybody should have installed if you don't already. And maybe this is too obvious. If you're in marketing, you probably know these tools, but if you're in DevRel, you might have come from a dev background. You may not be as familiar as with the accepted tools that people are using in content marketing. So I want to share this anyway. Email capture is still really relevant. I know that for some companies, the call to action is star our GitHub repo, try our, go use our open source tool, in which case maybe email capture is not as interesting to you. But in a lot of cases, running a weekly or monthly email newsletter with product updates, blog post updates, interesting content you've gathered from around the web is a great way to keep people involved that aren't ready to buy yet. And often developers with developer sale or selling to developers, it's all a battle of timing. You just want to be on their radar for 6 to 12 months until they're ready to buy. The CRM integrations, another really great way to kind of get more insight into where leads are coming from your content. Social scheduling tools are great for making it easier to get that stuff out there on social media on a regular basis. And then if you get into really doing content marketing at scale, you're going to need to learn some of the keyword research tools out there. Ahrefs is the one I personally use, but SEMrush is also really well respected and supposed to be just as good. User tracking tools like Hotjar, also kind of cool because you can see where people are clicking around on your site. If you're trying to optimize like where to put email sign up placements or calls to action, etc., this can be helpful. But again, these are kind of next level things. I would focus on the first level stuff, essentials first. And then last bit here to say on tracking and iterating is updating your content is a really important part of improving its performance over time. And I kind of touched on this a couple times, but typically with developer content, every 2 to 3 years, the content's starting to get out of date. And by 4 or 5 years, it's practically useless in most cases. And so you really need to have a plan in place for how to update content, especially once you're a year or two into this. That can mean going through and rewriting whole pieces, especially if you've already started to rank for a term and you want to keep the ranking for that term. You may have to reinvest $1,000 or $2,000 to get something completely rewritten every year or every 2 years if it's a completely different version of Java or whatever. What some companies have done, like DigitalOcean's a good example of this, and to be clear, we don't work with them as a client, but like I've seen their content for a long time. They just focus each piece of content on a specific version and combination of versions, and that allows them to rank for versions that are out of date, which sometimes people aren't looking for. You can also look at the results of each content strategy you're doing and change it over time, come up with more topics in the same way, and then re-promote pieces as needed. And this is kind of like something that I would say going through this cycle of options with each piece of content you should do on a quarterly at least basis. If you get a big enough team, you can probably do this monthly. You can kind of go through all the pieces we published in the recent history of they're still ranking and decide what do we do with them next. And again, this all depends on how much time you have to invest in this. Okay, so I had a couple questions come into the QA, so I'll go ahead and answer these real quick. Okay, so first question, since augmenting documentation is a subset of content and it doesn't get as much traffic and your clients tend towards goals like high search traffic, what topics, kinds of technology do you tend to create the most content for our clients? So for our clients, this is a good question. Like what topic areas do we create the most for? First of all, I'll say the goals for our clients vary quite a bit. We have lots of clients who are focused on just augmenting their documentation, just like they have trouble getting their engineers to write integration guides, or if they're a tool that integrates with lots of different programming languages, they may not have in-house experts on Ruby and Python and Java. And so they may ask us to sort of help augment their docs team. And so that's a really common use case for us. It's not maybe the most common. For people that are like pushing towards search traffic, some topics that are really popular among our clients are DevOps, data engineering, data science, front-end development as well. Just generally, there's a lot of different front-end tool companies we work with because it's just a huge market. And then a fair bit of low code lately as well, which is, there's a fine line between no and low code and sort of like, I don't know, those tools, they're all over the place. But I think low code is really interesting because it's basically enabling, it's a higher level abstraction as what we would call it as developers. And what that means is it's not really that low code is getting rid of code. It just means it's moving it a level up so that it's easier and faster to produce more code behind the scenes. And that's a really cool area that's getting a lot of traction and a lot of funding as well. Generally, a sales cycle for B2B SaaS ends at the personalized demo for higher search queries and signups, and CTR are higher, leading to more MQLs. So what should the strategy be to find a balance between niche topics with less volume and an audience versus general content targeting higher search volume or more junior devs? Okay, so the content mix is kind of the question here. Man, it's really hard for me to say like this is what it should be because it's so situational. And this is again where I think companies need to have some content strategy knowledge in-house. I think you can absolutely get external consultants who can help guide you a bit and get you started. So I can give some thoughts on this, but there's not one answer to this question because it's a good question. Generally speaking, I recommend something like an 80-20 or 30-70 split, where 70% of content is aimed actually at top of funnel, like more like the broad audience, and 30% is the more focused stuff. And what you try to do is write sort of broad content that points people down towards the more focused stuff over time. Now, again, this is a rule of thumb. It's not a blanket 100% rule. That 30% of content that is more focused on the bottom may be the highest value content you have as far as like the most dollars it produces. But that top of funnel content is really great for building up like domain authority and traffic, which is an indicator that search engines and social platforms use to see like, is this actually a worthwhile site we want to continue to promote? So it's important as well. It also is good for like kind of building in your own internal links. So that's the mix we use at Draft.dev. Hopefully that helps. I know it's a very like general rule of thumb, so I can't say that that's like definitively the way you should always do it, but that's something I often tell clients. Okay, so let's go into a few real world examples. I know this is taking me longer than I thought. I thought we'd be done in 45 minutes. So I hope this is still interesting. But I thought this would be helpful for people to get a little more concrete with their examples. And caveat here, I don't like to share specific client strategies because a lot of these are still in progress. So I'm going to be a little vague here, but intentionally. And it's not because it's not because I can't say it's because I don't want to hurt anybody's strategies that they're using, and I don't want to overshare. So one company we've worked with for quite a while does DevOps tooling, and broadly speaking, it's a CI/CD type tool. And their strategy has been go after as many of the keywords in their space as they can possibly go after. Very high volume, but also high quality content. And often this is what a lot of developer marketers are kind of skeptical, or developer relations people both are skeptical of keyword research because they think it requires, or like keyword research and SEO, because they think it requires this high volume of content, of low quality content. But the trick now is Google's getting smart about low quality content. Like AI writing is there and Google knows it. It's going to know if your piece is a complete, if it's completely thin and worthless and not really any value added. And so because of that, you can do high volume content, but you have to do high depth content as well. So they've done a lot, and they spend a lot with us as well as other providers who've actually, we know they work with other direct competitors of ours to build up a huge library of content and capture all the major search terms in their sphere. They've built a ton on internal backlinks and external backlinks, both through free and paid methods. They've done a really good job of updating, refreshing content on a regular basis and adding internal links to other pieces so they can kind of cross-link a lot. That helps build up their search reputation. And they've just basically repeated this cycle for the 2 years that I've known them to be operating. And it's done really well, as you might imagine. I mean, they've put a lot into it, but it's also driven a lot of results and way beyond the stage that you would think they'd gotten in such a short period of time, because it can be so tough. But they published well over 100 articles in at least the last year, and they're getting like 100,000 page views a month last I heard. And so it is driving. And what's cool is they could stop posting new content today and probably still get 100,000 page views a month for at least the next year or two, because the content they've got out there already is just so much. And it's already they could probably spend a few minutes every month tweaking pieces and then adding some more backlinks and getting another round of sharing, and probably continue to drive more and more traffic over time. So again, this is the compounding value of content. Now, this isn't the right strategy for everybody, but this company in particular, has really done a good job like pushing out content and saying, this is the way we're going to grow. And we're going to show investors traction through sort of cornering our little piece of the market with content. And so very viable strategy, but it is a long-term strategy. I mean, you have to kind of do this for a year consistently to start seeing really good results like this. Okay, so that's kind of a more typical case for content marketing. Another really good example, and I've kind of talked about this a bit, but is a front-end builder tool, like front-end, kind of like a front-end for you sort of library. And their goal is converting free users into paid users. And so very product-led growth strategy, where the idea here is, a lot of people are going to sign up for our free or open source version, and some small percentage are going to become paid users. And so the way they come up with topics is basically go to some of their paid users and see what their use cases are. They create ideas for tutorials that are just generalized version of those use cases, and figure we'll share generalized tutorials about how to build X with our tool. And that'll show the developers who are on our free plan or using our open source tool, we can share that out with them and show them how to actually get advantage out of our paid tool. And a lot of them, or some percentage of them, will upgrade. So it's a pretty straightforward idea. They'll directly share stuff. Their DevRels teams and support teams will directly share pieces with customers when they ask, but they'll also put it out into their Slack community, into their GitHub repos and things like that whenever it makes sense and people ask about it. And then they focus a lot in their metrics on usage, so like look at, like a lot of product-led growth companies do, they look at usage of different free features and paid features, and they see, what gets usage. And then they sort of use that data to understand, okay, what do we write more about in the future? Really great feedback cycle, and they've kind of got it dialed in. And that's ended up, vastly improving their conversion rate. They were a little vague about the specifics on it, so I don't want to, without going into that, the idea is, though, that they didn't have to publish a lot of content to do this, which is pretty cool, because I think a lot of people, again, like that, this is another end of the extreme of value of content or ROI of content. Yeah, you can do it by publishing lots and lots of content and getting lots and lots of page views. And I'm sure that some of those people are converting. And if not, they will, because they'll start building middle and bottom of funnel content over time. But you could also focus, if you've already got a little audience or community, you can focus on bottom of funnel and just write 12 or 24 pieces of content over the course of a year and easily start to get some conversion lift. And that can be really powerful and helpful if you're really like tight for budget, or you want to focus on sales as quickly as possible, even in a product-led growth company. Because I know the idea with product-led growth is that, theoretically we could get it to where our product is just so good that it sort of like speaks for itself and people are automatically converting and doing paid, to a paid plan. But the reality is, like, engineers want to do a little research before they just start paying for stuff. And so showing them things with use case tutorials is a really good way to do that. Okay, the last one, and I've again touched on this use case before, but this was really, this is more specific going into it. This is a company that sells to more enterprise. They're an API provider, or API solution. So they provide data through an API to enterprise level customers. So it's a very sales driven organization for the most part, and their marketing arm is a little newer. The big goal for them has been overcoming the engineering objections that their sales team gets. So in this sale particularly, they will sell to a business leader, but that person brings it down into the engineers who are going to implement it in-house and use the API and the data. Those engineers often come back to that business leader with objections like, oh, this data is not clean, it's not the way we want it, doesn't do this, doesn't do that. And so overcoming some of those objections by creating tutorials or integration guides rather, that show here's how to get the data in the format you want, or here's how to integrate with Snowflake, your backend, or whatever you've got there that is like, going to be part of this solution, can be really, really helpful for them. And they take these pieces of content. Again, they don't have to produce much content either. They'll take those and give them to the sales team. And so even the most juniorish level salespeople that understand that objection can go out and fish out the right piece of content. And that's really great, because it saves that business leader a lot of time of going and selling this back to their engineers and implementation team, who can be kind of like a roadblock for the ultimate closing of the sale. And then they sort of iterate on this by just recording future objections from the technical side and coming up with new ideas based on that. So again, it's a pretty low volume approach, but it leads to an increase in direct ROI, but also closed sales. It makes the sales team super happy because they look technical. They look like they know what they're talking about and how to talk to that technical audience. And it also can just sit out there and like kind of augment their documentation as well. So really useful, really high ROI type content. The last bit here, and again, if you've got questions, feel free to drop them in. Happy to go into more specifics. I will share these slides with this slide here of additional resources. There's a bunch of articles that either I've written or other people that I've worked with or in the industry have written. They're helpful. Some of the things that might be really good are like, if you're going to do keyword research, the article that I wrote about how we do our topic clusters and keyword research should be pretty helpful. There's also a talk I did, I've done a couple versions of, about how to generate developer content ideas, which kind of expands on some of the ideas already in this presentation. So like, it's a little bit of repeat, but that might be helpful as well as a reference. If you're going out to find your own writers, and honestly, like, I always encourage clients who are brand new at writing to go try this on their own first before they come work with us. Because it's a really good lesson in how difficult it can be to manage third-party writers and to work with software engineers who have a day job and then try to get them to write on the side. We do it all day and we do it with 300 plus writers, but a lot of our clients have tried doing it themselves for a while first and just seen that it can just be a big operational challenge, and that's why they come to us. And so if you're skeptical about this or you want to do it in-house, definitely do it. I wrote an article about how we do it, and I'm happy to, that's like free and out there. So other things on promotion too might be helpful around. There's a list of developer newsletters we put together with their sponsorship rates. So both pitching your content to developer newsletters is great, but also sponsoring those newsletters gets you a lot of goodwill. This isn't really a huge hack, but something I've heard several clients doing is they sponsor 5 or 6 newsletters in their space, which can be really cheap because these are niche newsletters with small distribution, but they'll sponsor them every quarter, let's say, and then pitch them articles every week of, hey, we wrote no new piece, just something to consider. And they get a really high placement rate because they're a sponsor. And it is good content as well. It's not a conflict of interest necessarily, but it's absolutely a good way to buy goodwill with that newsletter owner. And then same with podcasts. Podcasts, another great way to get your content out in front of more people by going on as a thought leader and talking about it, or talking about the kind of content you write, or sponsoring podcasts as well. Okay, so I've reached the end of my slides here. If anybody's got questions, whether on the Draft.dev team or any of the other participants, now's your last chance. Otherwise, we will send this out as a presentation. You can always follow up with me via email. I put my email in here if you wanted to ask a private question or a specific question to your company.
Yeah,
okay,
I've got one.
Matt, yeah, did you have something?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I was recently talking to a company. They've been quite successful on enterprise-focused sales-led motion so far, and they're looking to pivot to not to replace the sales motion, but to augment it with like a developer-first bottoms-up motion. And it's not, a little bit more context, it's not like a complex sale or integration process. The main goal is just how do they get more developers and where their solution exists. So like, what type of content would you focus on? Would you focus on like high-level keyword focused awareness, or how would you kind of approach that situation?
Yeah, I mean, if the goal is like, are they kind of like a new solution that doesn't have existing competitors, or are they replacing an old one, or are they in a like established kind of, frothy market?
So it's basically like data, like they have access to data that's of a much higher quality that enterprise solutions would care about a lot. And it's just a matter of kind of exposing more people like, hey, we have this premium solution available.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if it's about awareness, like, so if it's a problem people already know exists, there may be some keywords that are good to target that are actually a little more middle and bottom of funnel. For example, like, I mean, I'm going to pick something that is probably not it, but it's like a very well-known space. Like, let's say it's data enrichment for sales purposes, right? There's a ton of API companies that do data enrichment to help you get more, better data on your sales leads. And there's probably a ton of established search traffic. It's probably pretty competitive, but my guess is there's some niches or there's some specific long tail keywords that you could go after to start to carve out your little space there. The other thing to think about is like, could you segment off some of these keywords by industry? If it is competitive already, could you write up a solution that answers the keyword, but then kind of focus in on your particular industry? And so I don't know if that helps a little bit, Matt. Does that make sense? I mean, definitely keyword stuff is good. Probably also some thought leadership kind of content would make sense there too, where they're talking about why their solution is the best, why we built it the way we did, some of the technical advantages. Like often, if it's hard. I mean, you've got to answer the business case, but at the same time, like if there are legitimately technical advantages to what they've done, then they should talk about that as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Nick, you just raised your hand. I'm gonna Nick Hodges. I'm gonna allow you to talk. Go for it. Oh, let's see. Talking is permitted, but I think you're muted. I apologize.
I'm on mute. Can you hear me now?
I got you now. Yeah, thanks, Nick.
I guess my question was, do you have a strategy for overcoming the fact that our competitors pretty much own and dominate and crush us in the keywords that we want?
Yeah.
Anything bother? Is there anything worth doing there, or?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we've had several clients that were in really competitive spaces for keywords. There's a couple. I mean, first and foremost is like, is there a different, can you zig while they zag? Maybe is my like strategic question. And I don't know what that looks like exactly, but if they're all like aiming at keyword driven content, could you do something slightly different? But the other way we've gotten around this, and we have had plenty of clients that say like, yeah, we know that we could do other things and maybe we're out at conferences, but our competitors aren't and stuff like that. But we do want to pursue keywords anyway, because we want to start to get a toehold there. So what Ahrefs has a really good tool for like competitor analysis, and you can kind of see blank spots between your competitor or like where your competitor hasn't kind of ranked for something. So you can look for long tail keywords that are kind of specific to your niche, but your competitor doesn't rank on the first page for yet. And then look at that as an opportunity. So we've actually done a bunch of those analyses when we do keyword research for clients, where we kind of dive deep in there and try to figure out, are there some little toeholds we can start to get and build some domain authority and sort of like, slowly conquer it. But to be honest, like, it's also going to be a long slog. And that's, again, the question why I always kind of point to, it's like, well, do you want to do the SEO driven approach when they all are, or is there another way around it? And yeah, that's a big question. So I don't have an answer.
Great. Thanks very much. This is a great talk. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. Somebody else in the chat asked a question, so I'll answer this. And if you can either raise your hand or type in a question. Yeah. So what happens when blog posts compete with each other and with your product pages all going after the same keyword? That's a really great question. I've actually run through this many times. We've actually, this is kind of a similar example. We had a client who was targeting a bunch of keywords. We have a lot of clients that are targeting both business stakeholders and technical stakeholders. And that gets really tricky because often the keywords overlap by quite a bit. So let's just take something really trivial, like we were just talking about that, the data for sales purposes. So as an engineer, I might look for data that is like, I might be asking like, APIs to integrate with for sales data, and then a business person might also be looking for APIs that integrate with sales data, but they might want higher level solutions, and engineers might want lower level solutions focused on their programming language of choice. So I kind of have a couple thoughts on this, and I don't have a ton of data on this, but I would love to hear if other people do. Thoughts are, first of all, Google is contextually aware of who's asking the question, who's entering the search query. And if that search query is someone it knows to be an engineer for whatever reason, so it's like my search history or my search history will dictate what I get in the future, same as yours will dictate yours, it may give a different result. So it might be okay that you have the same page ranking highly for the same keywords if they're targeted at different audiences, and Google has picked up on that. That said, the whole like, our product page is out, like, underranking or outranking or like cannibalizing our keywords. I think it's interesting. I think you want to try to point your backlinks in a way that is towards the top page for that. We actually have a post like that like, I'd love Draft.dev's homepage to rank for technical content, but we have a blog post that outranks it. And so our homepage doesn't rank as well for technical content. And we just point that, that blog post page over to the homepage as much as possible with like backlinks. And either way, I mean, we're capturing the traffic. It's still value for us, so I don't worry about it too much. But yeah, there are people who also like have, I don't know, there's more, maybe this is like a deep dive SEO question that would be good to ask, like go into specifics on. So yeah, good question. I wish I had a better answer, but if anybody else does, let's see who we got. Max, what you got?
Yeah, is there, I know we've kind of talked in the past about having like expectations around content, like the idea that consistently having B plus. I think I got this quote from Clayton: consistently B plus content is better than sporadic A plus that you're in love with. Can you kind of speak to that idea of consistency
Oh man.
over,
Yeah.
preciousness?
It all depends. I wouldn't I hate to answer all these with it depends. A lot of it depends, and this is why like content should be a part of your overall brand and strategy. And it shouldn't be just like its own separate cordoned off thing. So what I mean by that is like if you are high uh, a high quality brand that focuses on doing very few things, but doing them very well. And you're not worried about scalability. Like an example of this is like, I know a couple agencies that are super, super niche. They only work with like 12 clients a year. They just intentionally like cap themselves there. And they don't care that they rank for terms or whatever. They'll write 2 pieces of content a year, but each of those are 3,000 words and they get picked up by every newsletter in their space. That's viable. It's not a bad strategy. It's just totally different from the strategy that another agency, like we take a pretty kind of similar to your question about like having some really good content mixed in with like just consistency. Like we're very consistent on the Draft.dev blog, but not every piece is like the best piece ever written. I wish it were, but sometimes I don't come up with the best ideas for a single piece that I'm writing. Sometimes some of our other writers don't, and that's okay. That's part of it. Like we're trying to get better over time. We go and refresh pieces that we think could do better. We could add more data to or whatever. But that's my pragmatic side. So it does depend a lot on your brand and how you want to fit in there. I will say though, for most of our clients, they are more on the venture funded or high growth track where they're looking at the potential to explode their sort of valuations or the amount of traffic they get. And in that case, I think generally speaking, consistency and a steady drumbeat of lots of content is better than making every single piece precious. But also, why not do both? That's sort of the reasoning behind with that client I had mentioned who does like a lot of their content is SEO driven content that is like, it's high quality, it's good content, but it's maybe not like just a glamorous thought piece that's a book. But then they do these like every month, they'll do 1 or 2 of these really deep thought pieces that are kind of like unique and weird and quirky and have their own style to them. And those attract a different audience and kind of help augment the other kind of content. So I just think that the answer is like both can be used, both are important, and it depends on what your brand is, what the mix of that you want to use is, and what the overall strategy is, what your goals are. So yeah, not again, kind of ducking the question, but it's a really good question. And then for the slides, so after this, somebody in the asked, and this is viable question as well, getting to the slides, we will send this around to everybody who registered for this webinar. So if you put in your email address when you registered, you will get the sort of recording of this as well as the slides. And so if not, shoot me an email and I'm happy to send them to you. Great. Well, we're at time, so I am going to let everybody go. Thank you all so much for hanging around. I know this was long. I will tighten it up and make it even better for next time. If you have any questions beyond this, definitely shoot me an email. Otherwise, it was great to see and talk to a lot of you, and I look forward to the next time.